Welcome back to Christian Questions on News Talk 104.7 WXLM. Our subject this morning, what is the baptism of the Spirit? To be a part of our program, call 860-442-9956. That's 442-WXLM.
And Jonathan, this week is certainly very different than last week, isn't it?
Yes.
This is a much more difficult subject. It really takes a lot of getting really deeply involved in the Scriptures and trying to pull out what they're meaning. But there's a terrific lesson here if we can get it, and that is that this baptism of the Spirit was something, first of all, of great importance. Mm-hmm. It was something that was prophesied by John the Baptist, not mentioned again until about 4 years later, and then you have Jesus setting up, saying, make sure you're at the right place so you can be there at the right time, and now you have this outpouring of God's power and influence, and this is the beginning, the true beginning of the Christian movement in earnest, because now they have the tools with which they can expand the gospel. Again, let's read verse 4, Acts chapter 2, verse 4.
And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance.
Okay. Again, let's go back to Russell on this because he really lays this out for us clearly, I think.
The numbers of believers who were together in the upper room at the time of the outpouring of the Holy Spirit was about 120. There they were all immersed in the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit filled the house. But whether or not the tongues of light rested upon all others than the apostles, we cannot surely know. It may have rested upon them only by way of distinguishing them as mouthpieces of the Holy Spirit. Certainly it is that in the subsequent preaching with various tongues, there seems good reasons for supposing that the apostles only preached, because it was said of the speakers, "Are not all these which speak Galileans?" We cannot suppose that the entire company of 120 were all Galileans. It is quite probable, indeed, that the majority of them were Judeans, but the 11 apostles were all from Galilee, and hence it is probable that they alone did the preaching, and probably also that they alone had the manifestation of tongues of light in the upper room.
So again, Jonathan, that's a good explanation, and what it does is it helps us to understand this is a difficult set of scriptures. There's a lot of pieces that you try to fill in and get a sense of, and you really have to pay attention to how it reads. Are not all of these Galileans? Well, we do know that the apostles were all from Galilee.
Yes.
So it gives you a sense that they were the ones that were doing the speaking, and we see that in the history of Christianity too, because as you see the gospel moving forward, who are the ones who are always speaking up? It's the apostles.
The apostles, yeah.
Okay, so we have this scenario where the Spirit is given, and now Christianity can now actually move forward and be solidified as a true movement. Because remember when Jesus said to them before he was crucified, "I'm leaving you, but you're going to have comfort when I'm gone," because God's Spirit was going to come, and they're going to teach you those things that you need to know. This was the first great miraculous manifestation of that. There's one other marked change we want to get into at this baptism, and that is in Simon Peter. And I think this is worthy of taking a little bit of time on. Let's look at the before of Simon Peter's life.
Luke 22:31 and 32. And the Lord said, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren."
Notice what it says, when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Let's hold on to that phrase. And we're going to come back to that in just a couple of minutes, because that's exactly what happens here. And guess who's the first one to speak up?
Peter.
Right. Okay. Now, let's look at what happened. It says, remember, Jesus is praying for Peter, saying, Satan, now this is before Jesus is crucified. He's saying, Satan wants you. Mm-hmm. He wants to sift you out. But, there's a great statement there, but I've prayed for you.
Wow.
So it gives us a sense of the power of prayer. Again, a different subject. But he's saying in the future, you're going to be converted, and then you need to lead. You need to step out of where you've been and become something bigger. Now, what had Peter been? Peter had been very impetuous. He had a measure of courage, but it wasn't deep enough inside of him, as we'll see in this next account.
Luke 22:54 through 65. And they seized him and led him away and brought him into the high priest's house. But Peter followed afar off. And when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the court and had sat down together, Peter sat in the midst of them. And a certain maid, seeing him as he sat in the light of the fire, and looking steadfastly upon him, said, This man also was with him. But he denied, saying, Woman, I know him not. And after a little while another saw him and said, Thou also art one of them. But Peter said, Man, I am not. And after the space of about 1 hour another confidently affirmed, saying, Of a truth this man also was with him, for he is a Galilean. But Peter said, Man, I know not what thou sayest. And immediately, while he yet spake, the cock crew. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how that he had said unto him, Before the cock crew, this day thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. And the men that held Jesus mocked him and beat him. And they blindfolded him, and asked him, saying, Prophesy, who is he that striketh thee? And many other things spake they against him, reviling him.
So Peter, in his desire to be with his Lord, followed at a distance. And so there's a measure of courage and there's a measure of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But then when he's confronted saying, Hey, you're one of them, you were with him, we saw you 3 different times, he out and out denies what's happening. Meanwhile, the situation with Jesus is getting worse and worse and worse. And Peter, rather than standing up for him, rather than doing something to protect him or to come to his aid or to encourage him, is beginning to cower in fear. And as it happens, he denies him 3 times, and Jesus had told him he was going to deny him. And remember what Peter's response was? No, I won't. I'll die with you.
That's right.
And he didn't. He didn't yet have the courage. And when he realized that this is what was happening to him, what does it say he did? He went out and he wept.
Bitterly.
Bitterly. I mean, he realized how weak he absolutely was. And he needed to be re-energized with a new kind of a strength. So his weakness was revealed to him. And you can look at that one of 2 ways. You can say, well, look how weak he is. What would you want him leading for?
Mm-hmm.
Or you can say, look at the potential he has. That's why we want him to lead. Jesus saw in him the potential